All right, so we're going to talk about rounding decimals and estimation today, which is going to be helpful in our decimal unit. So before we talk about rounding, we really need to talk about place value, because they often say round to a certain place value, say the tenths or the hundredths or the thousandths or a whole number. And if you don't know what those place values are, it's not going to be very easy to be able to do it, okay? So we have our decimal point. Let's give myself a couple places in each direction. All right, so the first place value come along is the ones, okay? It's just like the first numbers you learned as a child, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's in that ones place. And a lot of times you'll also hear it called the whole number, okay? So if you're asked to round to the nearest whole, they mean round to the ones place. They don't usually say round to the ones place. It's more often round to the nearest whole. If we're moving to the left, this is pretty easy because this is what you've done all growing up. Next to the ones is the tens place. Then we have the hundreds place. Thousandths. And after thousands is 10,000s. After that, you get the 100,000s and millions, etc., etc., etc. And it goes on forever, okay? So we'll stop there. Thousands, there you go. So we got our ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. In addition to that, I'm trying to get it off of this. Okay. Going the other direction with our decimals. So it does mirror it, but the ones and whole place is a special place, okay? There is not a once, if you will. It starts mirroring around the ones place with the tens. So the tens matches up over here with the tenths place, okay? Just like the hundreds is gonna now match up with the hundredths place. Next to the hundredths, as you might guess, is the thousandths place. And next to that is the 10,000ths place. You would keep going, you'd have 100,000ths, millionths, 10 millionths, etc., etc. So it's the exact same place values on either side. The only difference is you're adding this THS onto the end of the place value. That's the only difference. Otherwise, it's mirroring perfectly around the ones and the whole place, which is our center point. Okay, so that's our place value. So now let's practice some rounding. So our first one says round to the nearest whole. It's important to know what you're rounding to, because otherwise you might not get it right. So remember, our whole is our ones place. So right now we have a 7 in the ones place. And when you're talking about rounding, you want to look at the number immediately after whatever place you're rounding to. So in this case, we're rounding to the ones place, so I need to look at the tenths place. These other numbers right here do not matter at all what they are. You can completely ignore them. You don't round up along the way, you only look at the one right before it. So since the number before my 7 is a 0, that does not round it up. So rounding to the nearest whole, it's just going to be 17. You're looking to, if it's between 0 and 4, it's going to stay what it was, and if it's 5 or higher, that's when it's rounding up. So if I look at my next example, I have a 4, and in the tenths place it's a 1. Again, not going to round it up, going to stay at 24. In my next example, though, right before the 4 in the tenths place is a 5. That 5, if it's 5 or higher, will round it up. So instead of 44, it's going to round to 45. My last example on this page, if I look at the tenths place, I have an 8. That 8 will round the 39 up to 40. So that's rounding to the nearest whole. Let's look at another example with a different place value now. So now we're rounding to the nearest tenth. Okay, so our tenths place in this problem is this 0. So again, you're looking at the number right before it, in this case the hundredths place. That thousands place still does not matter. I can still ignore it, okay? So I'm looking at that hundredths place, it's a 9, definitely over 5, so it's gonna round my number up. So instead of 17.0, I'm gonna round it to 17.1. My next problem, I have a 1 with a 5 in the hundredths place. Again, 5 or higher rounds it up. So it rounds up to 24.2. Third example, we have a 5 with a 2 in the tens place. That is not going to round it up. So my number is going to stay at 44.5. And last example for my tenths problem, I have an 8 with a 0 in the hundredths place. Again, not going to round it up. That will stay at 39.8. So that's rounding to the nearest tenth. Let's look at one more example of rounding. Now, as you might guess, we are rounding to the nearest hundredth. So hundredth, remember it goes tenth, hundredth, so that's the second spot after the decimal. And now I'm going to look to the right again at the thousandths place. So that 8 is going to round my number up. Now this one's a tricky one. So if I'm rounding up, this is going to make this round up, but it's a 9. So that 9 will actually end up also rounding up that number. And I'll end up with 17.10. Okay. Now that is the same thing as 17.1. And most of the time you can just write 17.1. But in this example, we would want to write 17.10. The reason is it says round to the nearest hundredth. If they want us to round to the nearest hundredth, we need to write the number all the way to the hundredths place. I need to show that I know that that number is 0 and that I wasn't accidentally rounding to the nearest tenth, which is what that looks like. So that's why when you're talking about rounding, go all the way to the place that they're asking you to round to. So on this next one, we got a 5 in the hundredths place, and I look at the thousandths and it's a 2. That's not going to round it up. So it's just going to be 24.15. My next example, I have a 2 with a 5 in the thousandths place. That 5 will round it up, so now it will become 44.53. That 2 becomes a 3. You notice no other numbers change. Only the place value we're talking about changes, unless you're talking about an example like this one where it was a 9. That's the only way any other number is changing, okay? In my last example, I have a 0 with a 9 in the thousandths place. Again, that's going to round it up to 39.81. So you notice for all of them, since I'm going to the hundredths place, all of them go to the hundredths place. So be sure you go to the place value that you are rounding to. So that's how rounding works. And it can be pretty helpful when you're talking about estimating, okay? So we're estimating the sum and the difference. Sum, remember, is addition. Difference is subtraction. And the reason it's helpful is to figure out roughly what your answer should be. Usually when I'm rounding, especially problems like these, I would want to round to the nearest whole. Occasionally you might round to a tenth or a 10 or 100. Use your best judgment. The estimation is to help check that you're doing the problem correctly. So this first one I am going to round to the nearest whole. So 15.8 I will make 16. 22.03 will just be 22. Which mentally I can do this, is 38, okay? I'm writing down the problems, but you really can do this mentally, which is the point, to be able to easily check yourself. So that 38 means whenever I actually do the problem, my answer should be very close to 38. This helps catch some mistakes, like accidentally not lining up your decimals. If I don't line up my decimals, and I start doing the problem like this, and I'm not sure where to put the decimal, but no matter where I put this decimal, my answer is nowhere near 38. Okay, it should be very close to 38, and it's not. If I do the problem correctly and line up the decimals, you'll see that I get very close to 38. 37.83, which rounds to 38, okay? So you can clearly see that this was not done correctly. So it's a way to help check your mistakes by mentally estimating what the answer should be. So go ahead and pause and try this next one on your own, and when you finish it, hit play to see what the answer should be. All right, this next one, we got 29.88. If I round that, I'd get 30. 6.9333 would round to 7. So my answer should be roughly 23 when I actually subtract them. All right, last practice problems. Go ahead and pause it and try these two on your own, and then hit play to see what I did. All right, so if I'm rounding to the nearest whole, I get 15 plus 4, so this answer should be very close to 19. And if I round this one, I should get 300 minus 50, so this answer should be very close to 250. So that's rounding and how it can be useful with estimation, which is a very good intro to the beginning.